BNN, the Bad News Network. This is a BNN special report, New Orleans 2008. MSNBC reported last night that the homeless are not being allowed in this evacuation. We've been told that everyone has to evacuate as a mandatory evacuation, but homeless people are picked up, they're taken to these buses, and then they show their IDs, which do not indicate a permanent residence, so they're not allowed on the bus. Meanwhile, they're told by the mayor and others that if they're on the streets, they'll be arrested, and that there are no shelters. Only 1/3 of the billions that were appropriated for the levee repair has been spent. It was just a few months ago reported that the levees were not as high as they were at the time of the Katrina disaster. The Bush administration has announced plans to build a 100-year floodgate. Now, when Katrina happened, Rotterdam engineers, who've built the best floodgate in the world, offered to build a 10,000-year floodgate just like the one they have at Rotterdam. That would have saved the city. The president at the time said that he was going to do what it takes to save New Orleans. But he hasn't done anything of the sort. He hasn't even tried. Rotterdam and Amsterdam are also below sea level, yet they don't have to worry. They have a 10,000-year floodgate, so they're not going to flood out. New Orleans is going to flood out over and over and over again. And if they put up a 100-year floodgate instead of actually fixing it, then people probably aren't going to come back. This disaster evacuation today points up the discrimination against poor people still going on in New Orleans. People are urged to flee. They're told they have to flee. This is the end of the month. It's the worst time to be poor. People cannot afford to go very far out of town, so the highways are strewn with broken down cars, people whose cars weren't in shape to go and people who couldn't afford to leave. And now there they are, out of gas or with their cars broken down, and there's that just adding to the disaster, making more of a problem. Meanwhile, there are thousands of troops and Blackwater people that have just come there from war zones, and where many of them have been accused of killing civilians. They're there with their military weapons, guarding property against Americans. Blackwater is profiteering from this disaster the same way they profiteered from the war. Shortly after the New Orleans disaster 3 years ago, Blackwater troops were on the streets of New Orleans, and some of the people were starting to come back. One black citizen had returned, and you've, I'm sure, seen it on television and on YouTube. He was tortured by Blackwater and FBI and police there right on the street, and he brought a case against them. When his case finally came up a few months ago, he got dead suddenly right before being able to testify against Blackwater. All of a sudden he was dead. This is a serious problem that's going on now, and Blackwater has lots of people rushing there to suppress the poor people, brutalize any of the homeless that are still there on the streets. How can they, after shooting civilians where they just were, how can they be invited here in the United States to kill more civilians, to brutalize more civilians? In 2005, after Katrina, Blackwater personnel in the area were paid $950 a day per man. Those funds could have been used to help these people gas up their cars to get out of town, if that's really important. Although 115-mile-an-hour winds, I mean, I have to say, I myself have ridden out at least 20 storms when I lived in Florida that had 115-mile-an-hour wind. Where they really needed to get away from are the flooded areas, but I don't believe that anyone should have had to go to Kentucky or New Mexico. That's ridiculous. That's wasting the government's money, evacuating people much further than they needed to go. President Bush and the Republicans have ruthlessly used the ethnic cleansing of New Orleans to tweak the demographics there just exactly as Burma did to their people after the cyclone. Congress should impeach President Bush immediately for the destruction of New Orleans, and Senator Obama should stop blocking that impeachment immediately.